we shouldn't care how we recover. We call a survivor Jack, right? So we do it for Jack. We don't care how we recover Jack, whether it's a soft team on a local nationals fishing boat that's able to get them, or a pararescuemen in their own boat who are going out to get them, or it's a Marine helicopter. It may not have a hoist, but it can certainly land like wherever and pick them up. So joint fight, trying to get them with any asset possible. The point is that it's survivor-centric. So for CSAR, our number one needle points to the survivor, and everybody's just like focused on getting Jack.
Tower, Delaware 6 is release to you, runway 4 left, wind 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seat tied, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Viper check 2. My brand ram curve was at 354. So yeah, flights on. Next picture, 16, 15,000, target, something like that. Viper 1 target.
Welcome back, Shiner, man. You're moving up in the world. You're Bob now. You're the boss. So for those listening, I'm going to re-release the episodes we recorded. You got to go check out Shiner because we dive deep into your distinguished flying cross you got in Afghanistan, which I just like envision the images in my head of what you were describing, just getting lit up, A-10 strafing over you, and you guys did some good work and saved some people. So I'll re-release those episodes. You also like left a few There I Was stories. So you've been on the podcast, but it's been a few years. And now you're in a different spot. So, dude, can you give me an update where you are in the world and what's going on with you?
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, Rain. I appreciate it. It's good to see you. So since we last talked, I was the DO at Nellis, the 66 Rescue Squadron, which we closed that squadron and historic place, moved on to Kadena with a lot of the folks, the operators from the 66th. So I'm the commander of the 33rd Rescue Squadron at Kadena Air Base, Japan, in the Ryukyu Islands, so the most southwest part of Japan.
We're talking a lot of combat search and rescue today, and search and rescue in general, but the layout, so the 66 is closed, and there's a mix right now between the HH-60G, Pavehawk, and then the Whiskey, which is the new variant, and I want to dig in and talk about that today. But as you talk about, all right, hey, we have the squadron out at Kadena, which you're leading the charge there. What happened with Nellis? Where are the other squadrons at? What's the kind of the force posture of the rescue world these days?
Yeah, so Nellis was one of the two big squadrons, 3 UTCs, 3 deployable flights there and at Moody at the 41st Rescue Squadron. And, higher leadership guidance was to close the rescue operations at Nellis and move those to DM. In effect, to include one day probably the weapons school and the test squadron, and that included Guardian Angel for pararescue as well. And that kind of leaves the force posture now with the 41st at Moody, which has all Whiskey model H60s now, and G models going under conversion at DM at the 55th RQS. And then we have our Guard Reserve components as well. And we've got folks from the 33rd actually up in Alaska helping those guys out with a backfill and a deployment, flying out of Anchorage and Eielson for support missions.
You know what sounds terrible to me?
Flying in Alaska in a helicopter.
Flying in Alaska in a helicopter. That sounds absolutely terrible.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. My one of my best friends from co-pilot times at Kadena is up there in a leadership role, and we, got a FAM flight when we sent some of the squadron up, but did a ski-on landing at 10,000 feet in the Alaska range.
That's spicy.
Pretty
10,000 feet. Yeah, 10,000 feet for an old helicopter.
Yeah.
You're working to do that, I would imagine.
It's a high DA, marginal power situation, but there's skis on the helicopter, and you slide it on, and then it's a whiteout for a few minutes after that. And then once the snow settles, you can see again, basically. So you hope you don't land in a crevasse. But those guys are the experts up there. And they've been doing great work for years, rescuing people. And it's letting the 33rd folks get some really amazing real-life experience rescuing backcountry skiers and medevacing folks that need help in super marginal weather. It's pretty cool. integration with the Guard Reserve up there.
You know, with the Air Force component of the Helo world being relatively small, especially compared to the fixed wing assets we have, do you guys do a lot of cross training with the Army, or is there any kind of integration where there's like pollinate? I mean, Army's flying a lot of those helicopters around.
Sure.
Does that exist, or is that just something that, I don't know?
Interestingly, we do not have a kind of an ongoing exchange with the Army, but our UPT starts at Fort Rucker. So there's kind of a synergy from the beginning there with kind of the brown suitor instructor pilots, or a lot of former Army, in at my time at least, former Vietnam pilots with, you know, a million hours teaching you on the Huey that was in Vietnam with them, probably. It's just been repainted and given a glass cockpit.
I flew with a guy not too long ago who was a B1 guy by trade, became a test pilot, and then when he got out of active duty, he got hired down at Patrick, flying H-860s. So late in his career, he has to go through and learn how to fly the Huey. And the story he told, like his first flight, was hilarious. It was, I mean, a day that no fixed-wing pilot, especially in the beginning of their training, would have considered flying in the contact phase, you know, where you need like day VFR, beautiful weather. It was like overcast at like 150 feet, and we go flying down this road in a trail of like 11 helicopters to like hover in this field, and then we circle back around, and we come back up the road and land. He's like, it was like a 12-minute sortie, but everyone's like, yep, that's good. And it was like all these old Vietnam dudes who were smoking a cigarette and not even thinking about it.
Yeah. What we do have exchange-wise is a real healthy exchange with the U.S. Navy and typically the Marine Corps. We also have exchanges with the British and Germans and the French, and I think recently Italy. But right now we have our naval exchange pilot at the 33rd. And so that serves a really useful kind of cross-pollination, cross-sell. And they're usually an experienced pilot, a flight leader, instructor pilot that comes over for a 3-year tour and trades helicopter knowledge with us.
Why not too, like from my limited experience, casual, just trying to absorb stuff up as a young dude in the Air Force, a lot of different challenges with operating at night, a lot of different challenges operating at night over the water, dealing in and around boats and things of that nature. Random sidebar, but like obviously where you're at doing rescues out over the water and dealing with ships, are there significant challenges when it comes to landing a helicopter like on a boat with, I see these videos, right, where the helicopter is coming aboard and then something's changing with, I guess, the dynamic, the cushioning or whatever it is, and then it goes away and then the helicopter ends up rolling over and it doesn't end well. What are some of those challenges?
So it's a qualification, and it's a memorandum of understanding between all the DoD components to fly helicopters to land on U.S. ships. And so the U.S. Navy's the lead on it, but there's qualification for single spot and then multi-spot landings on ships. And the single spot, where your rotor has, you know, maybe 20 feet clearance from the superstructure on a small destroyer, is pretty spicy. And there's pitch and roll limits from the LSO on the ship that they'll pass, and you have to land within those limits for normal operations. And in some of those videos that are really dramatic, I can picture the British Lynx trying to land on a British ship, and it's way out of limits, pitch and roll, and they're finally able to land it, but it's really spicy. But that qualification sometimes is just maintained by a few instructor pilots and instructor special mission aviators or flight engineers. And then from that pyramid, you can qualify people if you have to go to war at sea or go to contingency ops at sea. But for the 33rd now, there's multiple reasons why we'd have to go land on a ship for integration or medevac or some sort of patient transload. So we do try to maintain that qualification, and it is, I don't know, if you've flown for a while, things kind of get normalized. When you go to the tanker and you haven't seen the drogue in a while, sometimes that'll get your hair up on your neck a little if it's bumpy. But when you get to a ship and you haven't landed on a ship before, it is like it's a significant experience for the first time doing it. It's pretty wild. And recently we were able to land on a Coast Guard ship that was out here, U.S. Coast Guard. blue open ocean. Yeah, it was kind of cool.
That's quite a ways away. But a lot of stuff happened out there in the Pacific.
Yes.
It's a busy theater these days. It's been a pivot towards the Pacific last few years. Talk to me a little bit about the HA60G, the whiskey, and you mentioned upgrades going on at DM. Is it a conversion to the whiskey? What does it look like?
So the H60G fleet is our legacy fleet, and we flew those through basically all their lifespan in Afghanistan and Iraq during the war on terror, basically. They're good helicopters. They're workhorses. They were Lima model Army Blackhawks that we then kind of Frankenhawk modded to become the Pavhawk. And they've, in a lot of ways, reached the end of their life cycle. We were able to buy some replacement aircraft that were new aircraft, and they have like 2,000 hours on them now. So they're still pretty functional tails with longevity. So those have been kind of pushed to the top of the fleet and now are pushed to the Guard reserve units they're going to be the last to convert to the whiskey, but the entire force for Air Force rotary wing CSAR converting to the H60 whiskey, which is the newest version of the Black Hawk, produced by Lockheed Sikorsky. And DM is almost complete with their conversion to the whiskey now, and they're helping us convert a couple of our air crew. And then we're going to we get our first tails in January, so 2 whiskeys, and then we start converting. And by August of next year, we should be all whiskey squadron. So that'll be whiskeys on the ramp.
Is it a big challenge, or is it a big process to convert over to the whiskey for the air crew?
It seems so. I haven't gone through yet, but it seems fairly reasonable. It starts with a Type 1 conversion, which is done with Sikorsky instructors and simulator. And then it has tactical seasoning that's flown with Air Force instructor pilots that are previously qualified. And there was an initial cadre that was the folks that basically got at IOC and wrote the Vol 3 and got or still developing the tactics, if you will. But it has a lot more capability, and it's a new airframe. It's still a helicopter. It's still a Black Hawk, so it's not going to fly 4 miles a minute. It's still going to fly 2 miles a minute, but it's going to hover really well, and it's going to have a FMS that, when coupled, can provide pretty significant factors of safety over the water, and maybe probably all terrain to an extent. And it's just going to be better at everything than a helicopter is good at.
I'm guessing too, it's like, for me going from the F-16 to a big old fat plane, honestly, the challenge, even to stay right, it's like the automation piece. It's so capable with the FMS, the automation, knowing what buttons to push and when to do it and get the jet to do what you want it to do. Like, that's honestly like the challenge, which is much different than like, I just want to go over there, so I'm going to turn and point and do that. Sounds like, yeah, probably the whiskey. Like, when you're talking about like the safety margins over the water, there's making sure that you put in all the right things so that it has the information is probably, so obviously crucial, but an incredible capability once you're using it.
Sure. So I think the data in is critical there, right? To fly you safely over the water. But in this way, like, I think CFIT and just fatigue, it'll mitigate that significantly. And I agree. I think figuring out how to get the right data into the aircraft is going to be critical. And then knowing nuances where if it can do a turning approach and fly it itself back to this spot, like, it's not going to know where the terrain is or necessarily where the winds are in the way the pilot does. So there will be nuances of, how to fly it yourself, but also let the FMS fly it to the extent that it makes a factor of safety for you. For instance, we've hand flown all our brownout or whiteout landings for 30 years in the G model. And the Army does that even without a FLIR or Qs in some cases with their Mike models, Blackhawks. But in this case, the FMS can just take you to a hover and then vertically land you. And it mitigates significant risk of being IMC at 50 feet and having to like zero out your velocity vector to the ground. So that's a huge factor of safety. And then for kind of our bread and butter out of Kadena is night water rescue, open ocean. So really no horizon, cloud cover, really limited ambient lighting from stars or moon because it's blocked by the clouds, and then no cultural lighting from shore or ship, just open ocean, nighttime, low illume. With the FMS on the whiskey, I think it'll make what used to be the most complicated or the hardest skill set we did kind of a straightforward path from the beginning. And we've already pivoted culturally in our squadrons to qualify all our folks in night water, which is kind of the necessary skill set, at least at Kadena right now. And this will mitigate a lot of that as well. And it's got more powerful engines, better blades, full avionics suite that's just not 30 years old. It's new. It's great.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, when I was casual at Moody, this is 2007, 2008, and it's like, hey, the new rescue vehicle is going to be announced any day now. And it took 13 years or so for it to be announced. And then the number went from, 112, 115, and then the Air Force said, hey, we're cutting that to 80 some odd aircraft. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. And it was 112, and then it was cut down to 75 with the Air Force purchase. But then Congress has added 10 to that to 85, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. So that's what I need to have Bones Cook on here, or Paul Sheets, one of those guys. They're my flight commanders back in the day.
From status.
Yeah, it's crazy. Just how fast time goes.
Sure.
And, where it is. So I remember you talk about the fatigue. Like that, I didn't know anything, right? But I can appreciate it now, thinking back. I remember Paul. He was doing an upgrade ride for a new guy out of Albuquerque. So he's doing MQT, and we're going out doing, CSAR with some A-10s doing an upgrade for a Sandy mission. And I remember we orbited for an hour and a half, just doing it. And I remember watching him eat a sandwich up front while the other guy just flew the helicopter the entire time. I was like, gosh, it's be nice to put this thing on autopilot for a little bit. But it's funny. But again, I remember it's any day now, we're going to get a new helicopter, new platform to go out there and do combat search and rescue, because just like the F-16, just like the F-15, all these things were fragged for 2,000 hours, 4,000 hours on the airframe, and then just service life extension after service life extension to keep pumping these things out, keep racking up so much time on them. So,
yeah, 12,000 hours on the Golfs.
Crazy.
Too many hours, right? So the 308 beam, which is the structural longitudinal beam, starts cracking, and it used to be a one-time flight to depot to have it repaired, and now you just basically stopgap it with a mount or a brace, and then it just cracks further aft. A little while later, you just keep moving it aft.
It's fine. I mean, my statement of helicopters just shaking themselves apart, it still stands to this day. But yeah, it's gonna buff out. But the Eagle, a good jump on that is the Eagles. I think, if you look at the ones at Kadena, right? They plucked those off the island rather quickly last year. Now we're doing a bunch of theater security packages out there, which I think you said the Eagles show back up. But all those jets were fragged for a couple thousand hours, and then one extension after another, and then a couple of them, snap in half, no big deal. I'll be curious, the F-16, have you seen the wing flex? I mean,
no, I haven't seen it on F-16. I saw the video of the C model snap in half though.
Now where you want to be. I was just if you think about carrying all the external fuels and bombs and stuff like that, just going out there and pulling 5 Gs on it, just the amount of strain it's putting on all these jets. But we're flying them hard. So I take it it's busy out there in the Pacific for you.
It is busy. It's a deployed in place feel, but it's kind of special in some ways, the kind of family feel and camaraderie in the squadron is unique. You don't see that at CONUS units, I don't think. And there's a task and purpose, and people know why they're here. They know why they're coming to work every day. We're able to go support, missions that are maintaining the free and open Indo-Pacific, but we're flying alerts and sitting alerts for single seat folks, and then also supporting, local search and recovery missions, and then integrating with exercises kind of across the Pacific. So we've been to Brunei, we've been to Guam, we've been up to Alaska, both to supplement the mission there and for red flag. So there's, we have a twice yearly rescue exercise in Korea with the A-10s. So there's a lot of kind of focus on the mission here, and it's right at hand. So it's a different feel. It is busy. We've got the expeditionary fighter squadrons here flying, and we're able to integrate with them. We've had really good integration with F-35s recently, both to practice kind of like immediate actions on scene command for a PR event, and kind of red blue air with them as well. And we're just kind of like vetting our tactics and continuing to tweak them to just remain really pretty survivable in the Pacific fight for PR. So with the right tanker support, low speed drogue off a HCMC or KC-130 that's in an offset from the area, we're able to get gas and support and be honestly very survivable in integrated fight with a lot of game, I think.
Let's talk. I want to talk PR. So personnel recovery, let's talk that piece. And then I'd like to kind of transition into a more of a dynamic and high threat environment, especially when we're comparing between Afghanistan and Iraq. The threat in the Pacific, near peer adversaries, like big things can reach out and hit you and not feel good. Well, let's talk personnel recovery. What does that look like from even like day-to-day operations where you're supporting training? If you got, a single seat fighter, crew that's going out there and they're just doing training, and God forbid someone has to punch out. What does that look like from you guys launching to being able to find them to, if you had to go out and do a big blue water rescue, like just tell me like through the search and rescue piece where it's a non-threatening environment. Like, what does that look like?
So for a permissive environment, we'll sit night fighter alert for our single seat or 2-seat with the Strike Eagles out here sometimes. We'll support night fighter alert, and that is our standard support at Kadena. We have very competent professional partners with the JASDAF here. So they fly an H-60J, which is similar to a PAVOC with an aerial refueling probe. They also have external tanks. So they have, a 4-hour kind of airborne time similar to the PAVOC. And they handle daytime search and rescue in the Japanese territorial waters. So they do daytime SAR for any of our fast movers at Kadena. And then kind of with nighttime as our special skill set that we train to in a way other folks don't. We support night rescue. So any 18th wing asset, for instance, that flies at night, single seat, we're going to be on alert for that on an M+30. And it's all permissive environment, but at the step brief, or the show brief, we'll brief kind of the MOA or the area they'll be flying. And then we'll do an alert standards brief with our Guardian Angel crews. So our 2 pararescuemen that'll be on alert that night. But then we'll go fly our unit training program plan. So our whatever upgrades going on or whatever CT continuation training's going on, we'll fly that simultaneously, but we'll know where and when our jets are flying. So for instance, we executed a dry run with F-35s recently. They simulated an unlucky jet, called it in through the right C2 channels, both to us and to the tower. And we were able to re-roll an airborne mission, come get our PJs, get gas, and then pivot straight to that area. And so then you're switching from, kind of your LARPing, your live action role play of whatever combat mission you're pretending you're on, your imaginary stack, and then you're switching to maybe the other side of the island or a different airspace, getting gas either from a airborne tanker, from the ramp at Kadena, which is fuel truck. And then there's also a Marine base here, Futenma, that has Marines that just pop out of a hole in the ground and refuel your helicopter in minutes. It's really fast. great contingency gas, and then press straight out. And then you work with the Guardian team to plan what kind of pickup they would want. And it's normally going to be one bird is going to mark the survivor with a persistent signal. The other is going to then support them either with an offset hover or in a circle pattern around them or something as they pick up the survivor. To find the survivor right, we're going to F2T2 their C cell, and our aircraft radio is able to find and interrogate that. But we can also home on beacons and use the wingman to keep eyes on to find them. But that critical locate piece is difficult. And even if you locate them, we have, constant data that things move in the water, right? 1 mile in 15, 30 minutes, possibly if the tides are really strong. But you can see folks drift 5 kilometers in a matter of what feel like minutes airborne, but might be 30 minutes to an hour. And then maybe they'll get pushed back to where they were with coastal currents, and life rafts drift differently than people in the water, and also then a floating aircraft or something. So all of that floats and drifts differently. So even if they had initial eyes on, it might not be there. So we'd execute a search pattern in that case. And we integrate with the Coast Guard to get search data from them, which is a computer model program. So we'll have that printed for the expected drift currents, and the parachute's going to drift. So we're trying to locate them, but then it's just going to be a straight commit to a 70-foot, 100-foot hover, send the hoist down with 1 PJ in the strop if the pilot's ambulatory, and then put them in the strop and pull them back up, barrelman with them in the PJ together. And then if it's significant injury or multiple survivors, we'll either fast rope or helocast 10 feet, 10 knots over the water. Our pararescuemen will jump out. They'll swim to the survivor. We'll infill the second bird's pararescuemen. They'll prep them on a stoke splitter, and then we'll hoist them up to the aircraft.
Each helicopter carry 2 PJs. Is that like the normal?
That's the normal combat loadout. For a Civ SARS scenario, it could be just 2, but we'd still fly in a formation possibly for mutual support, hoist redundancy, and then we could possibly split that team, 1 on each aircraft, to work different patients. But for a training mission where we're integrating, we'll have 2 PJs or a pro and a PJ and 2 PJs on the other aircraft, so 2 and 2.
And they fast rope in the water versus...
So if we stay high, the engines won't get salt on them. And so you can actually salt out your engines and reduce your power margins so that you enter compressor stalls in a low hover over the ocean. And so for a fast, effective rescue, the last thing you want to do is fly over the horizon, open ocean, and then saw your engines out in the first 30 seconds of trying to rescue somebody. So if you can stay higher, it's better. So a fast rope, 30 feet, might mitigate a lot of that salt spray. Get your rescuemen into the water there, and then you can hoist them out. But if the winds and the salt spray is conducive, a helocast, you can fly straight to the point. You might blow the life raft away, so that's a consideration too. But you can get pretty precise with that, put your team in, then pick up to a high hover and just basically offset so that the sound isn't drowning them out too bad, and you want to get them out of the rotor wash, obviously. There's nothing worse than being in the water under rotor wash and all the noise of the helicopter. So you
I don't know.
From the
if I punched out, I guess I wouldn't care too much. I'd just be this would be the greatest sound on earth. The salting out your motors, I assume that's a known thing, you're assuming because you're probably seeing like an EGT rise, or
yeah.
I don't know if you guys.
Yep. So we write down our TGTs. We look at our TGTs at a given power setting, maybe 50% torque before we commit to below 100 feet, let's say in that case. And you see whatever temperature you're pulling, 680 or something. And then you look at if it rises after each iteration. You do a check on downwind and effect on each subsequent pattern. And then if it rises 20 degrees or 40 degrees, you have different kind of mitigators you take. and then you knock it off at a certain point, or switch aircraft real world if you can't knock it off.
Okay. And then for those listening, EGT, I'm referencing that. I mean, I guess different planes use different things, but it's exhaust gas temperature, so you know what's pumping out there. And TGT, I guess, is turbine gas temperature.
Yeah, correct.
And that's
Concept.
just probably different makers or models. When you like rolling back through, if you do something like that, are they ripping the motor apart each time to like look and do inspections, or is that like going through the bird bath and once you like wash it out, like, hey, we're good?
Yeah, so it's that basically. We'll go through the bird bath, then we'll do, on our return flight, we'll do a hit check, so a health indicator check for the engine. If it passes that, then we'll go through the bird bath and we'll rinse the engine. So they just pump, clear water through the engine basically as we run the starter. And then we'll do that on both engines. We'll start the engines, we'll run it, and then shut it back down. But if we bust the hit check and the engines are not passing, they've degraded significantly, we will then wash it with soap. That's a pretty corrosive soap, and it cleans the blades with the salt on them off. And then we'll start back up, run it, then go do another health indicator check, and then it typically passes because you're washing that salt off. It's not necessarily degrading it in the way that sand will eat at the compressor blades or destroy the actual engine with friction. The salt is just like building up and can be washed off. So it's not damaging it. It's probably damaging it long term, and that soap isn't good for it corrosion wise, I don't think, but you can clean it and then go back on alert so they don't have to tear it down.
Yeah, this is basically a recruiting advertisement for becoming a helicopter pilot, I feel like. Go fly out overnight over the water and just a bunch of salt water. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. Fly back. Yeah, it's going to be great. No, dude, it's spicy stuff, and it's impressive. And now these are like simple, benign questions, but to me, like, it's really interesting when you start breaking this down. And that I think, you take for granted not being a helicopter pilot, like, they just make it look easy. But like landing on a ship, it looks easy, but like there's so many variables that are going into it. Hovering at night over the water with like no discernible horizon. That sounds, I don't know if you can do it, but it sounds terrible to me. But I imagine there's situations where you just think too, is like the swells of the ocean, right? And like how far you can actually see. But obviously the lower you get, you can't see as much. But I just imagine the swells, if you got a dude hanging out in a dinghy, like just finding them, it's a needle in a haystack. Now, granted, there's technology, and if everything's working right, you should be able to hone in on. But like one individual sitting in a dinghy or two in a dinghy, like it's in big open water, not an easy thing to find.
Right. That find, fix, track, target isn't a great acronym for this, but it is kind of the same process to F2T2 someone. And
you still want to finish them. Finishing is like picking them.
You want to get them into the helicopter safely, right? But that is kind of the process we'll run, and it is just like critical to get any location data on them. And for SimStar stuff, like Garmin InReach and Shout Nano and systems like that provide like incredible fidelity with whatever satellite network it's using. And our folks are rescuing skiers up in Alaska within 30 minutes of notification in the backcountry with like within meters of the location they needed to be at.
Because, all right, correct me if I'm wrong. You, I imagine probably the ops desk, right? Like you guys don't have any tie into like Garmin InReach, but there's a rescue coordination center. There's one, there's Northcom, like down in Tyndall. I think it's back there now after the hurricane. But if there's some kind of civilian event that goes on, they have the ability to pull that data or get the information from the appropriate resources and then pump that to the squadrons?
Yeah, correct. So in CONUS, it's the AFRCC out of Florida. And so they have, they're 24/7. They have really high fidelity. And we would do missions in Zion National Park, for instance, out of Vegas. So their ops officer, their park ranger at Zion would say, hey, we need nighttime assets. Our contract helicopter can't support into nighttime, for instance, or the hoist isn't long enough. So they would then write, or they would kind of call the squadron to notify them, but they would know AFRCC is the place to call. They'd call the Rescue Coordination Center, give them the data off either the cell phone hit or the Garmin inReach or whatever coordinates or information. AFRCC would give it a mission number and basically vet it as a civilian request for military assistance, pass it to local rescue units, whether it's Army or Air Force. In that same process works in Alaska with the PRCC there, or the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center. Well-oiled machines, similar to how JPRC would work in CENTCOM or a COCOM.
With the joint piece of it, what other assets does our other branches bring to it? Coast Guard, I mean, I think everyone's seen movies with Coast Guard swimmers like jumping into the ocean.
Yeah.
Again, that sounds terrifying. But when it comes to like the Army, the Navy, the Marines, I mean, the Coast Guard, how do they fit into the personnel recovery system? What assets, what tools do they bring to the toolbox?
So PR it's a team fight. It's a team sport, and we shouldn't care how we recover. We call a survivor Jack, right? So we do it for Jack. We don't care how we recover Jack, whether it's a soft team on a local nationals fishing boat that's able to get them, or a pararescuemen in their own boat who are going out to get them, or it's a Marine helicopter. It may not have a hoist, but it can certainly land like wherever and pick them up. So joint fight, trying to get them with any asset possible. For CIBSAR, for like the U.S. or Alaska, the Coast Guard, does a tremendous job flying in some really nasty water conditions. We were able to send a pilot and one of our SMAs, so our flight engineer gunner, to the rescue, the Swiftwater, not Swiftwater, but it's the Coast Guard Severe Water Rescue School in Astoria, Oregon. And they just do rescues in huge waves. They have a pretty good factor of safety to train there, but you just learn pretty fascinating techniques to rescue people in really challenging sea conditions. So the Coast Guard, that's their bread and butter. And then they have ships with helicopters on them as well. What Air Force PR does best probably is kind of like really marginal weather flights and flights that are really long distance that require aero refueling. So whether that's over the horizon missions over the ocean, where this HC-130 can fly with the Guardian team, and they can parachute them in with a RAMS kit, so a small Zodiac type boat, to the survivor, and then that same HC-130 can refuel us en route. And in the case of Alaska, our folks have been doing 10-hour missions with the 210th Rescue Squadron there, from Anchorage all the way west to, say, like Little Diamond Island, which is almost in Russia. And they'll do multiple aerial refuelings. They'll pick the patient up in an area that the C-130 can't land at, and then they'll fly to the first place the HC-130 can land at. They'll transload the patient to them, and then they'll fly them to the best medical care as quickly as they can. And then in some cases for high DA, like Mount Rainier or Hood, you'll see Chinooks is the best asset for high altitude stuff on those mountains. Things above 10,000.
Yeah, so the long range stuff, which I think this probably can then kind of segue into a non-permissive environment. So I remember riding around, like, listening to these like CSAR briefs. So you got A-10s doing the Sandy mission, doing escorting the rescue assets in. But I think, as A-10 gets divested over time, we've had this conversation on other podcasts, like, well, like who picks it up. I think they said the Viper is the best platform to do it, but neither here nor there. That piece, that's a very complex mission set. So going into bad guy land and picking up Jack, like, can you talk to me what's kind kind of that. Has anything changed for you when it's like, hey, now that you're being escorted by a fighter platform to get into a point? Obviously, it's a hostile environment, so non-permissive. What's going on? What does that planning look like? What's that temperament like?
So to fly with Sandys is pretty great. We've been able to train with them in the Pacific for years, with the 25th out of Korea, and so we'll either go to Osan and train with them there, or we've gone down to the Philippines, integrated with Filipino military forces, and then flown SARTAF, Search and Rescue Task Force flights. And then in Afghanistan was able to do a real CSAR with A-10s. But in this case, Sandy 3-4 escorts and protects the rescue vehicles as we're en route. And then Sandy 1 and 2 go overhead the survivor. And they're able, similar radios to the H-60 or the HC-130, they're able to integrate with that survivor's radio and get location and authentication and able to communicate that way. That's critical. And I think the rescort role can be really important in areas maybe like the Korean theater of operations, potentially, possibly Europe, Middle East. For big open ocean, that critical piece could be really getting to jack and authenticating, interrogating, getting a good location, and then doing kind of the Sandy 1 role where the pickup vehicles, the helicopters in this case, are able to somewhat permissively transit open ocean and then use tactics to mitigate a threat close to jack to be able to get them.
I'll throw back. I did an episode for those listening with Habu. This is, I forget episode number, but it's going to be low 80s. Habu's A-10 pilot. We do talk about the rescort, combat search and rescue, and the various Sandy roles, because that's a complex mission set that the A-10 does there. And each Sandy 1, 2, and 3, and 4 all have a different role when it comes to doing something like this. So check that episode out for those who are curious about the Sandy mission. But interesting. Can you explain to me the importance of like authentication or like getting to him and like how that works for someone who doesn't quite necessarily understand or is familiar with that?
So to be able to authenticate the survivor just gives you proof of life, date, time stamp, make sure that it's not a spoofer, that somebody's not trying to have a search and rescue trap, and that the survivor's not compromised. And it really focuses everybody because it speaks to the mission in that this is a much higher probability of finding jack now because they're authenticating, you know where they're at, versus not being able to do that, maybe seeing a shoot, but not being able to talk to them and then losing them in foliage or the ocean. And you could say, I think I saw them, but I haven't authenticated them. But being able to get some proof of life and know it's your dude who authenticates and it's not the enemy, and being able to do that live and timely is critical. And so if the A-10 divests, to replace that role is going to be, like Habu was saying, like a mindset, right? Like CSAR can be done by any platform with the right mindset and the right training. And there's some of the right equipment needed also to integrate with those radios. So I think that piece, if solved, you can then kind of pivot the Sandy 1 role, especially with a lot of the folks going from the A-10 to maybe the F-35, and they can take that culture of combat rescue mindset to a new platform and then still provide some of that rescort, but a lot of that Sandy 1 integration with the survivor. And for thinking back to Habu's podcast, the point is that it's survivor centric. So for CSAR, our number one needle points to the survivor, and everybody's just like focused on getting jack, whether it's the strike asset or the recovery vehicles. And for strike, I would imagine the number one needle points to the threat or the enemy. So if a JTAC's passing you a 9 line, those coordinates are going to be for the target. But if our team passes us a close combat attack, their coordinates are going to be for them. or the survivor. So it's just this kind of pivot in mindset. But to fly with Sandy's is tremendous. Sandy 3 in 4 will escort you in a daisy chain or some tactic as they move you across the terrain, and then they'll strike targets or hold you as appropriate, and then hand you off to Sandy 1 and 2, who've been protecting the survivor up to that point. And there's no lack of heroic stories from Vietnam with the Skyraider Sandy pilots escorting in helos and then re-rolling rescue to pick up Sandy, who's shot down during the mission themselves.
I think no more noble of a cause than the combat search and rescue mission says. Like that others may live, right? That's the motto. So it doesn't get
Right.
more than that. The proof of life piece, I fully did not grasp that concept probably until SEER. You kind of, not that you take it for granted, it probably just wasn't an awareness, but how important that is. But if you think about, obviously you need to be able to authenticate and figure out, yeah, this is not a spoofer, this is a real person, right? But even just a timestamp of proof of life that this person is in this point or behind enemy lines. And this is a little bit apples and oranges in comparison, but like for people to think about, like that army dude, that private who ran across the lines in North Korea, where North Korea didn't acknowledge he was crossed. Like everyone knew he was there, right? Because it was such a public deal. But if you could imagine it, if it, like the world news did not exist and like it wasn't that publicized, that guy would just disappear. And turns out, like, obviously he was a private and didn't have any information or utility to the North Koreans. But if you just think back in history of the guys who have gone missing and we have no record of, they're still missing in action, or we don't find for 10 years, you can't hold a government accountable and people accountable. Like if someone gets shot down or captured behind enemy lines and they're just disappeared, having that proof of life that that person was alive and then under the, I say care, under the captivity of that government or that entity, they no longer are alive, that you can't hold them accountable. That's just one aspect of it. But I think the proof of life piece, like getting a timestamp, and there's a lot more that goes into that. But yeah, for me, that's something I didn't quite probably grasp until going through survival school.
Sure. Yeah, me neither. And knowing that piece gives you the reason to mobilize the correct response also, right? And just because you don't have authentication doesn't mean they're not surviving behind enemy lines still. But if you can know that and you make that a high fidelity process, then you can use the right assets and pull the right support, knowing that there is someone to go rescue. And also spoofer wise, for instance, in Afghanistan, you would get multiple smoke, spoofers popping different colored smoke as you'd go in to pick up troops in contact. And so if you don't have good comms with them, now for Kazovac, in those cases, you know where they are and you have secure radios with them, and there's still maybe an enemy threat, but the search component in the authentication is already complete. So it's just combat and rescue at that point, basically. But the ability to mitigate spoofers and make sure that if that person is rolled up, that there's procedures for that as well, that you don't go into a trap.
So Afghanistan, permissive environment, other than, you guys are down in the weeds and get AK rounds and RPGs shot at you, but
Sure.
We're not talking double-digit SAMs and other enemy fighters. What are your thoughts on like a near-peer threat and the survivability and the feasibility of going out there and rescuing Jack in a more complex and dynamic environment?
Sure. So this is stuff we're training to every day, and the jollies at the 33rd are hungry to go integrate with the fighters out here, and we've flown multiple dedicated integration flights with our C models and now our F-35s and our Strike Eagles. And we, the outcome is that we have a lot of game in a high-end fight if we are integrating with our forces. And so if it's an integrated fight, we have a lot of game, and there's a lot of considerations that are favorable to our being able to get Jack even in that contested area and get out of there. So it's pretty encouraging.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like anything, it depends. But I know this is something, if you think about too, it's like red flag, right? There's one day that's dedicated to personnel recovery, right? Where everyone's focused on that. So this is not something that we don't think about on a routine and regular basis. I know you guys are in the weeds, but different environment nowadays, it seems like.
It's a very different environment. And so there's a lot of that en route drone time to get to a certain location. And one of the biggest strengths of combat rescue, both with the platform and with the mindset, is our ability to do ACE, so Agile Combat Employment. So our Guardian teams, our PJs, can take their own boats to locations and stage out of there. And we can either meet them there, or they can integrate or execute unilaterally from those areas. And then we've executed off of small islands, just like basically a mangrove desert island where we run ops with good C2. We'll set up a little tent forest under the trees, get C2 comms. We're able to reach back to a hub and then execute missions for 2 days out of there. We still need to be able to get gas, food, water. But if you're hub and spoking out, you remain really survivable from any sort of strike at an airfield. And then you can always come back and get gas, or get gas off a tanker or ship, and then continue the mission. And so pre-positioning there, being able to then integrate with a strike or a DCA package and SIT alert, XR, airborne alert for those folks, and be able to get them during integrated ops and get out with the right support. What's critical in the Pacific is a rescue tanker or some dedicated low-speed drogue asset. And those things are HCMC or KC-130.
Do you have HC-130s at Kadena?
We have them periodically, but we don't have a permanent presence. But there's a push. We have the 31st Rescue Squadron, which are the PJs, and the 33rd, which are the Jolly Greens. So we've made a 32nd Rescue Squadron patch for the HCs to come out
to show up.
Yep.
Well, have they been there before, or is that something that's new where they got divested?
They'll visit TDY, but I don't think they've had a permanent presence out here.
Because I know obviously Moody has them, correct? And then some of the Guard and Reserve components across the country have them as well.
DM and Moody have HC-130 squadrons, so they have the full triad for pararescue, helicopter, and HC-130 at DM and Moody, and then Guard Reserve units are integrated at a handful of those bases as well.
But you have Marine KC-130 assets that are nearby?
We do, and they're fantastic too. They don't train to the CSRC, so the CSAR coordinator role, in the way our HC-130s, our rescue dedicated Kings, do. And that CSRC role is fantastic. We've used it in all our new training exercises, and then also in CENTCOM. My last deployment to CENTCOM is a great asset, and they're able to sit in an offset in a survivable area and then use their radios and systems to basically pass you all the rescue data so that you can, without even talking, basically pick up the survivor. So that's another critical rescue function they can serve.
Yeah, you know what I like about the KC-130s is the fact that Marines put Hellfires and Griffin missiles on it.
Yeah,
it's like
and
they're going to find a way to make this thing a killing machine.
Right. And I'm pretty sure they all have drogue capability on all their C-130s, which is awesome too.
Yeah, that's what I read talking to these guys who would maybe slinging Hellfires and then peeling off to give someone gas and then right back into the fight or whatever. Like, man, it's pretty spicy.
Yeah.
So let's talk ACE a little bit, peel that onion back. So there was a Stars and Stripes article about, I think, is it Tinanin up in the northern Mariner? Yeah, I can't pronounce. But it's the last really was used B-29s.
Sure.
I think they loaded the atomic bomb from there, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right.
But I have talked about it with a few guests with Agile Combat Employment, right? ACE. So instead of just having all your things at one spot, you spread them out, so it makes it tougher to strike. But can you talk to me a little bit in greater detail than what's that like for you guys?
So it's different in some ways for rescue. In some ways, we've been doing ACE kind of is a core competency since CENTCOM deployments or Afghanistan. Say Bagram was the hub, we would ace out of little fobs, but those fobs were established and they obviously existed with fuel and ammo, medical care, food, water. So in this case, we're looking at maybe first island chain for rescue, where other forces can't operate off of, places without runways, for instance. But if we can pre-position a fuel bladder there, get MREs palletized in water, or we can even hub out of a main airfield to soccer fields or wilderness areas and then small islands, but use a third aircraft for logistics and then keep the 2 alert birds fueled up at that area. You can just remain unpredictable. You won't have all your stuff at one area. And this scales to all fixed wing things as well, with Tinian and Saipan and these other old World War II runways that we fought the island hopping war up the Pacific chain. You can reopen those runways, put fuel and supplies there, and then be able to execute distributed operations and then just stay unpredictable and really make targeteers on other side have to make really hard choices about where to strike, and then hopefully you're not where they thought you were anyways.
Right. So as the boss, what are some of the biggest challenges you're facing today? What's the things that keep you awake?
Yeah, that's a great question. The things that don't keep me awake. So our air crew are awesome. They are super motivated and hungry, and they're just like smarter and better than we were when we were youngsters. So to fly with these guys is like a real honor out here, and to integrate with all our force. But I think just the open ocean stuff is a big consideration. Fuel issues that if you're on the knitter at Nellis, you can just land, right? But you can't just land over the ocean. So we have ox tanks. So keeping the ox tanks transferring in your cross check. We have random aircraft that don't like to transfer occasionally, and then you have half the gas you thought you had. So situations like that aren't at the forefront of your mind kind of keep me up. And then just keeping our dudes proficient, because it's, you need to fly to be competent and proficient at this job. So to run that line between flying so that our folks feel confident and proficient, but they're not overstretched, so that they have some capacity to surge when the time comes. And our folks are really good at surging and just going on alert and getting the job done when the time calls for it, but then being able to then give them downtime, but also keep them proficient when that's not going on. I don't know. I think those are like the biggest concerns, but there's really a lot of positives as well. The biggest like institutional concern probably is getting dedicated HC-130s out here to really make PR like a coherent like plan that is in place that we can execute. Because right now we're using AFSOC or the Marines to help us in that case.
Yeah, I would imagine that obviously if something kicked off, not having a dedicated HC-130, to be dedicated to the rescue mission would be a challenge. Now, flip side, I guess, is obviously if there's a jack down there, then in theory, right, everyone is dedicated towards that, but you're still competing resources, not having something that's necessarily always chopped specifically to that. So, and then too, it's like not having that into the big water. Because I was thinking, again, I do remember one rescue the 41st did while I was casual there. It was the Gulf of Mexico. It was just 2 guys that capsized or someone fell off the boat. I don't know, shady stuff. But it took a while to find it. They were doing, grid pattern searches and things like that. Like you need lots of assets flying relatively fast-ish, be able to cover enough ground to go out there and search for people. So
yeah, it's one thing if you have to fly, 4 hours, hit the tanker to rescue somebody, and maybe you have 20 minutes loiter time before you need to hit the tanker again. And that's enough time to rescue them, but it's not enough time to find them. So if you have to search, that just extends that loiter time, potentially exponentially.
Yeah.
And then committing, making the decision to use a tanker as a bingo where there's no other land or is pretty spicy too, right?
Yeah.
Because if you slay that drogue, you put the probe through the parachute there, and it's just, flipping in the wind. Like it's a spicy to be.
Yeah, it's self-critiquing immediately, and not a whole lot of good options. All right, talk to me before we wrap up here. One, and we can cover anything else you want, but I want to know what is the most challenging as operating, in that environment. What's the most challenging for you, or what do you think it is for just kind of the average pilot out there when we're talking about these things? You've mentioned like numerous things that all sound absolutely terrifying to me, but what is the deal?
I think coming to Kadena just like breeds and builds airmanship, in that other units you can look outside, and as a rescue platform you can fly, VFR and just look outside and maneuver the aircraft. But here, no horizon, doing gunnery at night. So you're attacking this island, shooting it, going into breaks, doing max rate turns. You have to use a cross check, doing night water hovers. You just have to go from the systems out. And a lot of fundamentals are based outwards in. So when you learn to hover in a Huey, you're going to look outside, and then you're going to maybe build in a cross check to keep your heading straight with your HSI or something. But here you have to just be systems based. So our cues are on our heads down display, which is the FLIR image, but we'll put that flight path vector. The Whiskey will change this with the FMS, but it'll still be systems out kind of. So I think the biggest challenge here is to learn to fly your cross check and go from inside the aircraft out. And then I think about it as, if I look outside and I can't see anything, well, that's fine, because I still have a tight cross check and I know where I'm at with two INSs, and I have a good radar altimeter. But if I do look outside and I can see something, well, it's awesome, because now I can see something, and it makes it a little safer. But if you do it the other way, you can go out, and whether you're in CENTCOM or here, you can have nights where it's just, you literally can't land because it's so hard with the visual illusion on a dry lake bed or RVA, restricted visual approach. But if you're using your system, it's well within the realm of safe and repeatable. So I think coming here and on your first TTO, local LMQT flight, going out zero loom with the IP in a 2-shift to go shoot at an island, no horizon, getting bloomed out, is a huge challenge. And once you adapt to that, you are just at a higher level of airmanship where you can kind of operate in any AOR where the helicopter can fly.
That sounds terrible. I've told the story on the podcast before. It was like doing night dive glide attacks over the water, low loom, and me and Chaos, the guy I was with, we both did one pass each. Like, this is not smart, because boats look like stars look like boats. And so now when you put this down at, like, I don't know, 75 feet, doing turns, like everything you're describing there would be incredibly challenging. I imagine too, NVG wise, so even if like there is illumination and if you are getting something from it, you're still looking through a social, right? You guys aren't using panoramics or anything like that yet.
So I flew a lot of my career on green NVG panoramics, which had a 120 degree field of view. And those were fantastic. Okay. A lot of people didn't like them because they were a little more bulky and it was harder to see like the overhead console and the throttle quadrant area. But I really liked them. I thought it gave a factor of safety. But what we have now are white or green phosphorus, so a different technology. And it is just, it's a world of difference. Like I say, there's no dark nights anymore, because even with cloud cover, low illum, that white phosphorus just gives you tremendous acuity compared to the old technology. We only have the 2.2 version, so it's 40 degree field of view. So yeah, that is kind of looking through binoculars or a soda straw in that case. And it's not good compared to seeing daytime with good sun illum.
Right.
but it is so much better than the old technology.
I think it's good to paint the picture too for those listening. Like if you're sitting in the seat, like think about wearing one. Obviously, you're wearing a helmet. There's lots of loud noise, right? You got the rotors going, you got the radios going. So there's some sensory deprivation that's going on there. But two, when you have like the NVGs on, it's this thing sticking out from your eyeballs. And like you said, like if you need to see the overhead panel or to look down and see the instrument panel, like sometimes you're having to move your head around or your eyes around. Like it's not just looking, like your view is obstructed. I don't know if I assume the white phosphorus one, if you look at the instrument panel, it's probably no good, right? Like
it's all,
F-16.
It's all gobbledygook. So you have to look under the goggles. So you'll keep your head straight ahead or to the side. You'll do a scan maybe, but really your eyes are outside on your goggles and then they're under the goggles inside, but you won't move your head. So it'll be a really quiet cross check with your body movement. It'll just be the eyes below, eyes through, and then you'll look up in between your goggles and your helmet mount to the overhead console to where the throttles are. And that's its own adjustment period, right? And it steals 20 IQ points for your first flights because you have 5 radios in your data link and your heads down cues, and then you're trying to look outside, but there's nothing to see, but there still is if you look hard enough. Then you have your FLIR image. You can cross-check through that too. So I think that adage of if there's no good pilots, there's just good cross-checks is like really pretty true flying the helicopter in our most restrained environment, which is nighttime, low illume, open ocean.
I'm curious to see, with VR goggles and the things that are coming out, how much better that will make chair flying or the first couple flights, right? Like people, and I included, right? Like you don't want to get rid of training and just like, it's all going to be video games now, et cetera. Like you need to get air up under you to build some airmanship. But like, if you think about, I studied on like a paper chart, poster board that was on my wall, but then to translate that into your first couple flights, we're like, oh no, these switches are actually back and behind me while I've been practicing this flow in front of me. Again, you lose 20 IQ points. Penguins are falling off the iceberg, right. Iceberg's melting, whatever it might be. You're having to spin the brain bites. But if you're using like the VR goggles and things like that, you can actually like look back and see, I need to flip the switch. So, one day,
I think it's going to be so much better. Really good stuff. And then, one day, hopefully there's a visor or something that's just seeing a synthetic vision of what's going on at night versus your 40-degree field of view.
Yeah. One day. Yeah. All right, Shiner, as we wrap up here, any parting shots, anything you think people need to know about rescue, Kadena?
Yeah, we're going to get Jack and rescue him, and we're going to train hard to be in the fight, integrated, ready to do that. And our partners here know that. And I think I was able to fly with one of my buddies, Voodoo, from the academy. We were alcove mates, and we went and flew together, him as a flight lead, me as a flight lead, and integrated. And it was just like a really cool experience. So like, I hope that those dudes know, and we're going to be there to get them, give them more confidence to get after it and go get the target. So it's a cool place to be out here. And it's an honor to fly with all the folks out here in the 33rd, 31st, and then all the folks getting after it, flying the fixed wing stuff at Kadena.
Dude, Shiner, thanks for what you do, man. Thanks for standing out there and being ready to answer the call if need be, and just being on the tip of the spear, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Rain. Thanks for having me on.